with the mind and the body. So through agriculture, the Indian farmer, the typical agrarian subject, tried to accomplish a union of the mind and the body. So agriculture was a sort of yoga in the pre-liberal times. So I'll be speaking from the perspective of this agrarian subject who was trying to see a holism of the mind and the body in agriculture. So I hope now you can see where I'm coming from. The farmer is a typical representative of an indigenous subject. Indigeneity was constructed through the perspective of agriculture, through agriculture in India here. But indigeneity, unlike, indigeneity is constructed mainly by the closeness the indigenous subject feels with the nature. But in this case, it was constructed mainly by a farmer's engagement with agriculture. So again, having said that, I do not mean that agriculture is not a productive activity. Indeed, it is production-oriented. But above all, there was an aesthetic connection between farmer and the farming he or she did. Now, I've mentioned farmer is a typical representative of a being dwelling in his own ontological closeness. Farmer is in search of his beingness, and the farmer feels the closeness with his own beingness when he engages in the agriculture activity. So such a beauty was attributed to agriculture here. I've called it that the farmer is a representation of a being dwelling in the material spaces who has an ontological closeness. He felt an intimacy with his own self when the farmer was indulged in, or whenever he indulged in agriculture. Now, agriculture too has been given a romantic character, that agriculture is a perfect confluence of the land, animal, and nature. So it's not just tilling or farming, but animal husbandry, cultivation, and forestry too were part of agriculture because of this confluence. So it was not a policy document that decided that Indian agriculture will be a tripod of forestry, cultivation, and animal husbandry, but actually this union of, or the confluence of the land, animal, and the nature, that in fact gave agriculture this romantic character. Now you can see that I might have presented a rosy picture, but in fact this is a beautiful beginning, that the farmer is somebody who's searching for his own self in his natural surroundings. And that search culminates in achieving a union of the land, animal, and the nature. And thereby the farmer accomplishes the union of the mind and the body. So in sum, this is agriculture yoga, which a farmer in fact would be indulging in. It is from this romantic perspective that we are going to take a look into the evolution of the law and policy in Indian agriculture. I hope I've presented myself clearly. In the northern parts of Scandinavia, the clock ticks according to the time of a reindeer. I mean, those who have lived in that part can clearly understand. The clock ticks according to the time of a reindeer. So the time space is actually the time space of the reindeer, because it's an animal is considered to be more ontologically closer to the beingness rather than the human being. So this philosophic perspective, probably this Heideggerian philosophic perspective, is what has given the Indian farmer the character of a romantic being. Now a few statistics on this. Indeed, farmer is a highly romantic concept. Agriculture is indeed a romantic activity. There is an aesthetic relationship between farmer and farming. Having said that, let me present a few statistics before you which might pose a paradox. You know that globally agriculture is, the contribution of agriculture to the global GDP is on a declining scale. India's position is far better when compared with the global statistics, yet the overall contribution of Indian agriculture to the Indian GDP is also on a declining scale. But of late, there has been what you call a discontent with the globalization, which is actually prompting many farmers to have an alternative imagination regarding agriculture, and they're trying to reclaim the old aesthetics which they somewhere lost in the 1990s in the process of neoliberalism. I'm going to tell that story. I mean, I was just giving an abstract of it. So I'll be talking to you primarily about how this farmer's ontological closeness was preserved by the earlier legislative efforts in India, legislative and policy efforts in India, and subsequently as India evolved, tried to be a global power in the wake of global ambitions, the farmer became ontologically decentered. Legislations began to be more market-oriented and production-oriented, but a tipping point was reached that the farmer began to feel the discontentment and then try to reclaim that ontology. So I'll present this ontological the reimagination of agriculture by the farmer, mainly through the organic farming revolution in India. And of course, how the organic farming revolution has transferred the very nature of socio-legal change. Right. Now, under the colonial rule, even though colonialism was production-oriented, it never interfered into the routine life of a farmer. Farmer never felt that he's in a production process, but the farmer always was able to preserve and nurture his own ontological closeness or his own aesthetic beauty of the mind. Colonialism to some extent has changed the agrarian, has some extent changed the manner in which the production happens by prioritizing certain products which has high import value. Certainly colonialism has changed to that, but colonialism has never disturbed the agrarian consciousness of this agrarian subject. Again, please note, when I say an agrarian subject, I mean a subject which is searching for its beingness by indulging in this agricultural activity, by achieving the confluence of the land, animal, nature. So colonialism has only changed the manner in which the market works, but it has never transformed the agrarian consciousness of the farmer. The consciousness continued to be the search or the collective search of the inner self of the agrarian subject, but material conditions were changing. The British rule has prioritized certain products so that there is a higher import value. Also, they prioritized a certain products and sector mindful of the larger market and the economy. But again, I'm saying the beautiful part was that the farmer was able to preserve his own inner search for the self, or his own search for the self in this process. Now, post-independence, to what extent this consciousness was able to preserve? Well, Indian Constitution, when Indian Constitution adopted, you might have already gone through a session on the Indian Constitution as in the directive principles of state policy part, which literally reflects the ambitions of the state, or which literally reflects the very essence, the self of the state called India, clearly stated in its Article 4 that the state shall endeavor to organize agriculture and animal husbandry on modern scientific terms. Now let me clarify this. On one side, the farmer wants to preserve his indigeneity, the beauty of his mind. And on the other side, India's ambition to be an active participant in the global process post-independence. And that's only possible only if India adopts a scientific temper and blend indigenous technology with the growing scientific technology. So one side, the desire of the nation, the ambition of the nation to be independent and self-sufficient, and on the other side, not to lose in the global process, or not to lose in the scientific development. So India typically at that point decided to adopt the blend, which we call the Nehruvian socialism, that we'll continue with a socialist mode of production, but at no point India will lose on the scientific front. Now why I'm giving this background is all the legislations at that time has clearly reflected this sentiment, that the Indian agrarian policy should be a blend of desire to preserve the indigeneity and also to preserve its global ambitions. So, contrary to the Gandhian aggressiveness to promote indigeneity in Indian agriculture, Nehru adopted a little bit scientific approach, but the science herein was not actually the Western science. I would just call it that the Western science is generally deemed as a violent science. The launching of a rocket typically represents the Western science, whereby the Newtonian equal and opposite reaction works. So there's a lot of violence even in the launching of a rocket. So that's a typical representation that the Western science is a science of violence. And Professor Shiv Vishwanathan has extensively written on this piece by saying that human life is kept alive by the Western science mainly by vivisections. Rats, pigs, and frogs have bled on the laboratory table to keep human life intact. Bombs have been dropped on the populations who revolted against the overall peace of human beings. So there is an inbuilt violence, or there is a violence ingrained somewhere in what we call the science, the modern science, such that Nehru decided not to subscribe to that science, but to develop a more peaceful, spiritual, holy science in India, typically in the line of C.V. Raman's holy science. So when Indian Constitution talks about developing a scientific temper, when it talks about adopting a scientific approach, it's actually talking about an indigenous science, a science which is more holy, a science which is more spiritual. I'm sure that gladly they would have subscribed to a quantum physics than subscribing to some nuclear technology. Well, however, post-independence, India continued with some of the British policies of promoting its imports, but by the time the British left, India lost its control over the markets, and imports began to substantially decline, and exports could never match with the need for the imports. And India, and a massive famine struck India in that period. So now the nation's only desire is to overcome the famine, and the only way to overcome the famine is to develop self-sufficiency. So out of this desire to develop the self-sufficiency, so I have a couple of factors here. One is post-independence, India lost its grip on the market, exports dwindled, and now a need to somehow survive. So the only option was becoming self-sufficient. Out of this desire has born this concept of this blending of indigenous agriculture with the indigenous science. And Nehru called for an indigenous technology that is at par with the global technology. At par with the global technology. If anybody who has got an opportunity to review India's space program can clearly understand that India doesn't subscribe to the technology transfer mode in space technology. Indian space technology is purely developed in indigenous lines. Even now that India markets, in the global market, India's remote sensing products are sold by citing that this is indigenously developed technology, not a collaborative project or a technology transfer project. So if you look at the philosophy of this, it runs too deeper back into the tradition that there was always a desire to develop a holy science. So Indian space science is still deemed to be a holy science. In the same manner, agriculture followed or subscribed to that concept of a holy science. Now, however, again, Nehru was educated in Cambridge. He had a modernist outlook. He wanted to develop an indigenous science. However, he doesn't want to fall into the aggressive indigeneity of Gandhi. So he said that let's have that blend, and he made that famous statement that dams are the temples of modernity, and if you have to promote agriculture and achieve self-sufficiency, construct the dams, construct the hydroelectric projects, facilitate irrigation so that the local farmer who's ignorant of all these technologies benefit from it. So the farmer was not being modernized. In fact, the aids to the farmer were being modernized by Nehru at that time so that the farmer is able to preserve his indigenous life. Now here what you can see is it's not really that they don't want to disturb the farmer. They want the farmer to engage in the production activity without losing the beauty of that farmer's mind. Now, this is pretty easy to speak, but for a legislation to incorporate this is really a challenge. How can a legislation promote agricultural technology yet try to preserve the ontology of a farmer? Because law is impervious to these sort of sentiments, which you know quite well, because law is essentialistic in nature and it many times doesn't have the potential to incorporate these sort of sentiments. So in sum, it was a major challenge for the law, and I'll soon talk about how law and policy, were in a flux along with these dynamics. So where we are standing is, to cut this story short, Nehru wanted a blend of modernism with a preservation of the indigeneity. So he said that let agriculture be promoted by the construction of major dams, major hydroelectric projects, and avenues for irrigation such that the local farmer is benefited, yet the farmer is able to preserve the indigeneity or the aesthetic connection he has with his mind and the body. Now, the Nehruvian science continued, and at that time India adopted a typical socialist mode. Agriculture was carried out on a collective basis, and even when agriculture was carried out on an individual basis, the distribution was done mainly through the cooperative societies. So typically, the Nehruvian socialism was merging with a sort of Marxist mode of production and a Marxist mode of distribution at that time. So it was a milder ideology which they followed, not an aggressive modernist perspective or aggressive modernist ideology. By 1965, the regime changed. Jawaharlal Nehru gave way to Lal Bahadur Shastri, and Lal Bahadur Shastri continued the Nehruvian policy, subscribing to the ideology the Indian National Congress followed at that time, which was a sort of Leninist internationalism, Marxian mode of production, and socialist ambitions. Lal Bahadur Shastri, while giving a talk in Ramlila Maidan in New Delhi, made a statement which highly romanticized the concept of agriculture in India in the 1965. In ending a speech, as part of his peroration, he mentioned that Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, that means hail the farmer, hail the soldier. Now he was really juxtaposing the soldier with the farmer. Now the situation was that in 1965, India was fighting the war. There was a Chinese war and a war with Pakistan. So it was a matter of a national prestige. So on one side, the war has triggered a famine, and famine is also triggered by other reasons, but war also triggered the famine. War was also causative to the famine. And on one side, there is a famine. The soldier is fighting in the border to preserve the national integrity. And here the farmer within the nation is providing the people, trying to overcome the challenges of the famine and also to provide the soldier with sufficient supplies. So he likened the farmer with the soldier, that the farmers feel a sense of empowerment, that the farmer is also playing a larger role in terms of the nation building. So this highly romanticized it, the concept. However, when we say hail the soldier, hail the farmer, it's not just a loose juxtaposition, but rather he means that there has to be a collective effort on the part of the Indian community to preserve the national integrity. So you can see that agriculture at that point was merging with the national policy of fighting a war. So they were put on a same pedestal. So, however, the desire was to increase the productivity at that time, and popular culture took this concept up. Numerous movies and numerous novels were written on this dictum of hail the soldier, hail the farmer, soldiers turning farmer, farmers turning soldier. So there was a bit of overzealous imagination in that. It substantially distorted the real romanticization which Prime Minister Shastri meant at that time. Now in 1965, as I've mentioned, the things were pretty bad in terms of agriculture. Obviously, there was a romanticization, I truly agree, except for that, productivity was declining because of the famine, there was war on the other side. So there was a need for the nation to immediately adopt some drastic steps so that India's income productivity is increased at large. So India subscribed to, again, an indigenous model of the Green Revolution. You're all aware of what the Green Revolution is, but Indian model of Green Revolution, again, is purely based on, as I've mentioned, that holy science concept, whereby India has to develop, yet through the indigenous technology. So all on a sudden, as the soldier, the farmer also became a national icon. So you can see in the United States and for the rest of the world, astronaut was the icon at that time. The typical valiant, the valiant, virtuous being. And in India, it was actually the farmer at that time, because India wanted to blend the national pride with the farmer's efforts. Moving forward, well, this trend continued. So if I talk about the situation of the laws and legislations at that time, the laws were more catering to the needs of the socialist economy. The laws had a socialistic character. Now, it's difficult for me to give a clear example because, as I've mentioned, there is no parent legislation for agriculture. Agriculture and labor are purely matters of the state legislature. So the state legislatures enact respective legislations, even though I'm going to give a few examples as we move forward for how agriculture changed through these temporal changes through the laws and legislations. But unfortunately, I don't have a parent legislation to show that this is the National Act on Agriculture, which could reflect all the trends. So substantial changes were happening in the state legislatures, but most of the state legislatures, whether the ruling party in those federal states subscribed to a socialist ideology or not, at large, there was a socialistic trend. Agriculture was purely seen as a mode of production. And within that mode of production relationships were formed, and distribution was done through cooperative societies, typically a Marxian ideology writ large in the Indian context. It continued for a couple of decades more, and until 1991, when the globalizing moment came for India. Now, even at the globalizing moment, when India decided to liberalize its economy and liberalize the agriculture, well, liberalizing Indian economy wasn't a drastic decision. It was actually India's desire to grow as a global power and also to be a participant in the global process. However, opening agriculture to the private sector was a disastrous measure without sufficient backup. So here, what happened was, once India liberalized its economy, agriculture was privatized. Now, let me pause here for a moment. You please think this in terms of that agrarian subject. That agrarian subject who was finding an inner beauty in engaging in this agriculture. For farmer, agriculture meant nothing more than the oneness of his mind and the body, the confluence of the land, animal, and the nature. All on a sudden, that farmer is being asked to be part of a competitive policy of production. It is I would call it an untemporality. I mean, in the temporal comfort in which the farmer was living, there was an incursion of an untemporality. Some untemporal conditions has entered that the farmer literally felt the indeterminacy. The agrarian subject could make no sense of the time and the space in which the farmer lived. So when you are thrown, or we are thrown into an alien condition, the first effort would be resistance. And resistance soon yields to adaptation. So this is exactly what transpired in 1991. Nobody literally criticizes India's decision to open its economy for liberal forces. But however, without sufficient backup, agriculture too became part of it. But that was the deal, as you all know. However, even in the liberalizing movement, India continued with its pre-independent import policy. Now you know that, India has to set an excellent balance of payment record if India has to struggle in this global economy. However, the privatization of agriculture to a large extent has been able to overcome the challenges of globalization or neoliberalism. However, the agrarian subject was never able to recover, and this led to one of the most tragic phenomenon in the Indian agriculture sector. We call it the farmer suicide, an infamous concept. So tens of thousands of farmers committed suicide from the period 1995 to 2017. India hasn't fully been able to overcome from that tragedy. Now, left intellectuals in India always attributes this farmer suicide to the ushering in of the neoliberal forces. However, the right intellectuals do not subscribe to that view. However, if we look at the measures taken by the government of India to overcome the problem of farmer suicide, we can endorse that somewhere there is a direct connection between neoliberal ambitions of India or neoliberalism and the farmer suicide. Before we come to that, let me quickly tell you what else went on at that time. Now, production began to increase, which is obvious when globalization happens and when free market sets in a state which religiously adhere to a national economy. Certainly production will increase because there is a demand to be competitive. Private agents entered agriculture. Certainly production will increase. However, the local farmers began to face a major threat, the scarcity of seeds. Could you tell me why there was a scarcity of seeds with globalization?
Because of GMO seeds?
Because of?
GMO, genetically modified seeds, and then they were patented.
Right. Could you talk in terms of interventions of regimes here? Because a new regime has started to enter the seed market. Which regime is that? The IPR regime. Right, the intellectual property regime. Right, all on a sudden, you're right. I mean that's connected to that. So all on a sudden, an IPR regime, because of the India's subscription to the WTO package, an IPR regime entered the market, and all on a sudden, essential seeds became unavailable to the local farmers, not to the corporate giants, or not to the corporates which were indulged in agriculture, but it became accessible to the local farmer, and local farming for a while stalled. This could be one reason again why the farmers felt hopeless, or the only way for the farmers now to get the expensive seeds or to access the seeds is to resort to the money lenders. And then the private money lending was so drastic that the farmers ultimately were pushed into debt, that they had to, life became abject for them, that they had to commit the suicide. Well, I don't want to take it that simplistic or make overstatements about the reason for the farmer suicides. However, once the privatization set in, but till then, if we look at the nature of the legislation during the 1960s and 70s and 80s, even the money lending legislations were so farmer friendly. And also government provided a lot of aids to the farmers in the form of subsidies, in the form of cooperative aids, in the form of providing a cooperative market. But when globalization came in, one more phenomenon happened. You all know that the state became a passive player. So all on a sudden, all the state aid stopped. State literally withdrew from the scene, and this literally made the farmer an orphan amid the global forces. So that's also one reason why the farmer began to feel ontologically decentered in those circumstances. So if you look at the two scenarios I presented, you can feel the gravity of the situation. Somebody who never thought of materialist ambitions, who simply wanted to live his life amid the beauty he experienced in indulging in this affair, and all on a sudden he's asked to be productive, productive amid the market forces. Now, after globalization, I said, while seeds were becoming scarce, the local farmers were suffering. Indian agriculture was booming there because of the global forces. Private actors were reaping benefits. Global agribusiness entered India too, the global agribusiness. And for those indulged in global agribusiness, the seeds are not scarce because they have the money and the resources to access the seeds. Indeed, it disadvantaged the local farmer, as I've mentioned. This ultimately led to the farmer suicide, and I've also presented that scenario. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. The leftist scholars, mostly the socialist and the Marxist scholars, began to criticize this for the government's decision to open the economy for global forces. However, we don't have many empirical evidence, and we often believe that this is the overzealous ideological commitment of these scholars that probably prompted them to link the farmer suicide with the neoliberalization. However, on one side, significant growth was also registered. However, if we look at the steps taken by the government to overcome the problem of farmer suicide, we have strong reasons to believe that probably the government is also trying to overcome the challenge of neoliberalism by empowering and enabling the farmer. Let me talk a little bit about it. So the statistics reveals that since 2000 till date, there were tens of thousands of cases reported, let alone the unreported cases of farmer suicide. And there was extreme concentration in terms of the suicide in certain states. So probably that it's the money lending legislations of those states were too harsh. There were no state aids to the farmers in those states. That could be a reason. Reason why the statistics are a little bit scattered, concentrated on some state, but not on the other. Now, as I've mentioned, the state retreated, the state aid stopped. that could be one reason why there was an increased farmer suicide. Now let me tell you a little bit about the actions taken by the government to overcome the problem of the farmer suicide. Now the first measure, and then we can decide whether this can be linked to the neoliberalism or not. First one, what the government did was at the district administration level, they conducted counselings for the farmers, telling the farmers about the need to be competitive in the changed circumstances. So in effect, it was a counsel to the farmer that don't participate in all the resistance movements. Don't try a revolution of your own. Don't be a sole rebel, but rather try to be part of the larger global process. Get empowered, unite together, and participate in the global process. So the counseling sessions. So in effect, the counseling is counseling the farmer about the need to be a global participant rather than telling the farmer you go and compete on your own. So this prompts us to believe that maybe that it's in fact preparing the farmer to accept the neoliberalism. Second, some of the states adopted debt relief schemes because they understood that the farmers need to be salvaged. So they wrote off a lot of farmers they wrote off a lot of debts of the farmers, recovering them, and legislative actions were taken by the states. And most of these legislative actions taken by the states to prevent the farmer suicides were focused on money lending acts. For example, the state of Maharashtra has the Maharashtra Money Lending Regulation Act, whereby they set limits to the interest rates that can be imposed upon the farmers. Now look at this specific legal action. On one side, there is a farmer suicide. The state is being asked to address the problem of farmer suicide. It is addressed by immediately making an amendment to the Money Lending Act. And the change made in the Money Lending Act is some sort of restrictions are imposed upon the interest that can be imposed on a farmer. Don't you think we have sufficient inputs to link the farmer suicide with neoliberalism? Let me quickly repeat that scenario. Farmers are committing suicide. The state governments are asked to take sufficient measures to prevent this. Immediately, the state government is enacting a legislation on money lending, which literally prevents the money lenders or regulates the money lenders from imposing certain interests on the farmers.
Who are the money lenders? Is it
They're local money lenders.
Just
Absolutely. Not the government, local money
small
lenders.
ones, yeah.
Disorganized money lenders. So you can see that here, somewhere there is a need for the farmer to gain sufficient resources to access to the seeds and other resources to conduct to do the agriculture, which the farmers were substantially disadvantaged of at that time. So they had to resort to the money lenders. So somewhere that they believe that if you empower the farmer by giving debt relief to the farmer will be able to participate in the global process. Look at holistically. On one side, the farmer is being relieved of the debt, and on the other side, the same farmer is being counseled. And the state is providing subsidies for these farmers to participate in the global agribusiness. So somewhere you know that we cannot rule off the observations of the left intellectuals as overzealous commitment to ideology, but somewhere there is a truth that this is directly linked to that. Again, I wouldn't say it's the problem of globalization. The state government should have taken substantial measures to guard. The state government should have taken substantial measures to back up the farmers who would immediately be deprived of the state benefits due to globalization. Now here, another state, Kerala Farmers Debt Relief Commission. Sorry to state these federal legislations, but you know, Indian agriculture is regulated through state legislations. The Kerala Farmers Debt Relief Commission amendment bill was submitted in 2012. As per this, government created new provisions for governmental loans to aid these farmers who have been victims in the hands of local money lenders, and also to free the farmers from the local money lenders. Substantial amendment was made to the Local Money Lending Act, also that they put a cap on the maximum money a person who doesn't have a registered bank, an individual bank, a registered money lender. Without proper registration, a cap was put on the maximum money that person can lend to the farmers or to whoever approaches them. So this is the problem of farmer suicide. The problem has not been fully addressed, but I believe that to a large extent India has been able to counsel these farmers and bring them to the forefront of the market participation. That today farmers feel free to participate. And if you look at the Indian National Policy for Farmers announced in 2007, it strongly encouraged young educated people to participate in agriculture. So today's farmer is not that indigenous illiterate. Today, people who have advanced degrees in agriculture resort to the farming. So this was a way government has seen to help India participate in the global agribusiness, so that young men or young women with a modern outlook, with global sentiments, who see the beauty of the mind in the global, in being with the global rather than with the local or with the indigeneity, participate in agriculture. So in order to overcome this problem, again, I mentioned that the problem started somewhere in late 90s. It still continues, the problem of farmer suicide. In order to facilitate the farmer and in order to regain the importance of agriculture, which was the mainstay of Indian economy, India announced a national farming policy in 2007. Let me just quickly tell you some of the salient features of this policy so that we can see this policy is part of India's efforts to overcome the ghost of indigeneity, or to exorcise itself from the ghost of indigeneity and try to move forward with the global forces. Look at that. First of all, it's suggested for sustainable farming. Sustainable farming, that means the land needs to be conserved. You know that why the land needs to be conserved. When globalization came in, other sectors began to boom. I mean, the technology sector, the telecommunications sector, the transportation sector, the services sector began to boom. And people began to have the money. And when people began to have the money, the petty, to use a Marxist term, the petty bourgeois began to emerge, who have the resources to buy the land, and land began to get split from the farmers. So previously, large amount of land were held by the local farmers. Now the land began to be purchased by the burgeoning middle class. So there was a substantial, scattering or substantial, dissipation of the land, such that it began to create a major problem. So the national policy here, as a response to this problem, suggested that we should conserve the land. We should conserve the biodiversity. So this is one of the salient feature of the 2007 agriculture policy, that one need to resort to sustainable farming. By sustainable farming, we simply mean preservation of biodiversity and conservation of the land. Second one, I already mentioned, youth participation in farming. Youth participation in farming, so that we all carry the image of a middle-aged or an old man doing farming in our minds. But that image has substantially changed, and now that educated young men and women who possess advanced degrees in agriculture began to be part of the agriculture today, so that Indian agriculture assumes the global outlook. Nobody feels the untemporality. Again, I'm trying to see this again from the perspective of agrarian subject. Look at that. The agrarian subject used to feel a comfort in certain time and space. And when the time-space changed, in 90s, when the new temporality entered, the farmer began to feel a discomfort. But young men and women are people who are habituated to the present temporal conditions. They're not alienated in terms of their own temporal conditions. I can give an example of this alienation. Those people who feel primitive in a mall. Those people who feel primitive in a mall, you're experiencing a state of untemporality. If you feel a closeness to the serene surroundings, you are being alienated amid the global forces. However, every comfort you feel when eating a global food product, the comfort you feel in enjoying a global product or a global service, that typically shows that you have overcome the problem of alienation. I personally don't think I've overcome that. I'm still an alienated self from my own ontological surroundings. So in sum, participation of the youth would help overcome this challenge of aesthetics, which the farmer literally faced at that point. Right, so young men and women, they are brought up in the new temporal conditions, and they know the global demands. So that's one reason why the policy, the national policy for farmers 2007 gave more emphasis on the youth participation in farming. Next one is an effective compensation system for the losses. By losses here we mean the losses due to the natural calamities, so that the farmers don't resort to the local money lenders. The government itself again come back. So again, you can see that in globalization, while the state retreated, the government of India here has shown the maximum possibility or the maximum possible support a state can provide to the farmers in the form of monetary aids and resources for those farmers who suffer massive losses. Finally, agriculture education. So they emphasized that there is a need to develop a new pedagogy and new curriculum, and include both in the elementary school, so that children are indoctrinated or children are educated about the need for agriculture and about that typical, maybe to preserve the indigeneity of agriculture in India. Finally, it also proposed for a social security system for farmers. India not being a welfare state, yet it's an ambitious move to propose a social security system for farmers. Now, in fact, these are some of the factual things that happened, even though I've made allusions to some of the policy transformations that happened. Now, let me again go on with my philosophizing of generalizing of how policy shifts happen from 1960s to the present. It's a taking stock of the things we discussed so far. So first of all, I've mentioned that During the colonial period, India was an active market participant, even though India was a national economy at that time. Farmer was an agrarian subject which lived in the aesthetic beauty of its own closeness with its ontology. And post-independence, one virtue of the post-independent agriculture policy is that some of the feudal lords who used to possess the land and the labor began to crumble. So once the feudal lords have crumbled, agriculture came to the hands of the government. And at that time, government had organized the Indian agriculture in socialist lines. And organizing it in the socialist line means greater aid for the farmers. I've mentioned a typical Marxist mode of production. Labor has been given more emphasis. Within that mode of production, production relationships were formed and distribution was through the cooperative societies. So farmers do the farming individually and every distribution of the harvest was made through the cooperative societies. You can see, if you look at the Indian cooperative societies legislations, you can see the socialist ambitions of the state therein, not only for the farmers but for the whole rural life and distribution of the rural resources therein. However, agriculture was corporatized during the globalization. So first of all, I talked about the pre-1947 period. When it was the British rule, the farmer was able to preserve the farmer's own consciousness, but India was still a participant in the market. Post-independence, a complete socialist mode. The agrarian subject's consciousness is preserved and India was slowly moving. But India was struck by the famine and the country had to recover from it. Thanks to the socialist policies of the state, it did recover. However, during the globalization time, due to the insufficient backup of the state government for the agricultural subject, nothing much happened on that front and agriculture was corporatized and corporate farming began to yield amazing results. So here two things. On one side, I mentioned that the farmer began to lose his grip over his consciousness. The agrarian consciousness is lost. The farmer's aesthetic beauty is lost, but on the other side, the country was booming in terms of its agriculture. Agriculture production substantially increased because of the corporate participation. Now comes the big question, do you need to preserve the indigenous mind of your farmer or do you need to preserve your status as a global player? Now, the government was in a dilemma and we all know that on one side, we all hanker for the inner beauty of the mind, whereas on the other side, the material pleasures. The same was the case with the state. And I've already mentioned the burgeoning of a middle class has substantially led to the distribution of the land ownership that the farmers doesn't have any more land at that time. Now, as far as the laws and legislations are concerned, India tried to reclaim its indigeneity, reclaim the beauty of the farmer, reclaim the agrarian consciousness through some legislative efforts. If we speak at large, I've already talked about the national policy for the farmers. On the legislative front, as I've mentioned, legislations are a matter of the federal state here. Some of the federal states went on with land conservation legislations. For example, the Kerala state enacted the Kerala Land Reforms Act and Kerala Agriculture Land Licensing Act 2017. So as per the Kerala Land Licensing Act, if there is a land unused, the owner can license that to the farmers, the typical leasing type, but here it's a licensing to the farmers. Moreover, by a 2008, the Kerala State Conservation of Paddy Fields Act, the Congress government at that time, Indian National Congress government, which actually subscribed to a liberal ideology, regularized all the possession of the paddy fields. So this goes quite against the conservation of the land. Here on one side, the government has to make an effort to conserve the paddy fields, whereas on the other side, the Congress government has regularized the possession of all the paddy fields. Subsequently, a socialist government came to power in this particular state and the socialist government immediately said that all the lands, all the paddy fields which were turned into plots or which were turned into habitable land right after 2008 will not have any validity. So on one side, you can see that the government ideology plays a big role here. The government which is committed to a liberal ideology is trying to regularize the possession of the land, agricultural land. And on the other side, the socialist government is trying to reclaim those agricultural land and trying to create more opportunities for land conservation. So in this push-pull of ideologies, farmers reach nowhere. And the subsequent government will announce a new policy that, no, we need to be global players. So get rid of your indigeneity. Let's regularize the land possession here. Let's regularize the possession of the paddy fields. So in this push-pull, this is continuing. And then I would say that I'll cut my story short, something really drastic happened. Now, where do we stand? We are standing at the verge of a globalizing moment or a liberalizing moment for India. India has entered the global market. Farmers' inner beauty must have been lost, but who cares? India is moving forward. However, capitalism has an evil to it. I mean, I don't want to theorize largely into that. I would strongly urge you to read one of my pieces in Sandwalk Agriculture Law Review called Organic Farming Revolution. I mean, a new paradigm for social and legal change, Organic Farming Revolution, where I've explained in great detail. It's available online, I believe, Sandwalk Agriculture Law Review by Sandwalk Law School in California. I mean, capitalism has a unique character that it's over-ambitious. And in its overzealousness, capitalism at times overdoes. So when capitalism overdoes, it starts to penetrate into the routine life of the people. So one such example is that in the overzealousness to become an agricultural leader, or in its overzealousness to become a global to participate in the global agribusiness, the capitalist governments or the capitalist forces began to overdo agriculture for profits. The typical case is the typical case here is the case of pesticide overuse. Right, the pesticide overuse. So we reached a point that the overzealousness of capitalism in its greed for profit has taken to the point that we have to be doubtful or cynical about the food which is kept before us. We do not know to what extent the food is pesticide laden. So this is just a glimpse of it, I'm saying, that how capitalism overdoes and the capitalist imaginations at times interfere with the routine life of the people. However, when people may tolerate capitalism, people may be part of it. When it interferes with their own existence, people certainly revolt. So I'm going to present such a case for you, and I'm going to present this as an alternative imagination to the Indian agriculture. Also an alternative imagination in terms of the social change that was brought about in India, legal and social change brought about in India through agriculture. So I'm just going to tell that story. With that, I'll end my talk. So I've mentioned that, and I've here a case study, which is that of the state of Kerala, which is the southernmost state in India, a state which has a revolutionary tradition, a state which still cherishes socialist ambitions in its development, a state which still believes that a people's mass movement can resolve all the problems rather than legislative or policy intervention. So in that state, in the northern district of that state, there was an overuse of a certain pesticide named endosulfan. That's the name of the pesticide, endosulfan. So endosulfan began to make the life in the region wretched, that the after effects were that the kids in the region were born with cancerous diseases, and also it began to substantially affect their mental and physical health. I'm just cutting the story short. I mean, I've explained in great detail in the paper the after effects of endosulfan. However, immediately there was a people's resistance to that, because people feel that endosulfan is interfering with their right to have a healthy life. And immediately a people's mass movement has arisen, and as a result of the people's mass movement, immediately the federal state has banned the use of endosulfan. However, the ban by a state government hardly matters, because this is a global pesticide. But immediately the state government has banned it by way of a policy and a legislative initiative, and subsequently but the people's mass movements continued. Well, I said that the state government imposed a ban, but there are always ways to smuggle in the pesticide, because the pesticide yields greater harvest. However, it began to affect the life of the people. So the ban of the state government did not yield much result. Please note that the ban of the state is a legislative action. I would like to call it a legislative intervention by the state. The state intervened with a ban. It didn't yield much result. People's movement continued through various residents' associations, by the youth movements, by the sports and arts clubs. The movements continued. Because of the people's resistance, some of the NGOs joined hands in their effort, and the NGOs obviously they have an audience. They have the privilege of having an audience in some of the global forces. As a result, in the year 2010, the Stockholm Convention on the Persistent Organic Pollutants declared endosulfan as a persistent organic pollutant. Now that was a massive achievement for the people's movement, because the movement is very grassroots level movement. It's disorganized. You cannot even call it a revolution. It's that disorganized. That movement ultimately prompted the Stockholm Convention to ban, or Stockholm Convention at least to declare endosulfan as a persistent organic pollutant. Subsequent to that, Indian Supreme Court immediately declared imposed a ban on endosulfan. However, they weren't much success, because there is always the other side, the pesticide manufacturers. They have their own union, and they substantially quoted the existing legislations about the need to promote the market, the need to increase the agriculture productivity. They were only able to, because of their intervention, ultimately the state only had a limited ban on endosulfan. But yet, we are happy with the limited ban. But the thing is not about the ban. What we have to see is how the whole movement worked. There was an overzealous neoliberal intervention, or there was an overzealous neoliberal action of using endosulfan, which ultimately made the life wretched in that region. People's movement, legal intervention, social change. Please look at this pattern, how the society changed. Evil, let me have permit me please to call it an evil, which may be pedestrian, but then there is an evil followed by mass people's action, or the social resistance, let me call it, followed by legal action, social change. So we can see that there is a typical pattern for a social change to happen. A people's movement or a social resistance followed by legal intervention followed by social change. So maybe the pundits of the social legal studies would come forward to tell us that social change is possible only with a legal change, or rather legal change is one of the major constituent of a social change. I hope you agree to that view. I mean, this is one of the cherished dogma of the social legal studies, that social change is possible only with the intervention of the laws. And if you look at the case of endosulfan, it typically endorses this case. However, no matter the success endosulfan happened, there was a passive state for some time. There was neutral conditions after some time. Again, the pesticide overuse, not endosulfan, but overuse of other pesticides began to continue in the state. And this time legislations could do nothing. So you have here legislations which ban the pesticides. Also we have legislations which impose certain standards for the use of the pesticide. You're getting my point? On one side there are legislations which ban certain pesticides, and on the other side there are legislations which impose minimum standards for the use of the pesticide. So in this push-pull of a ban and the minimum standards, people began to be served fruits and vegetables laden with the pesticides. Now here, there is no scope for legislative intervention because we have exhausted the scope of the law. Law has intervened, but then law also has a balancing act. So now social change is not possible. So previously I mentioned you that equation. Evil followed by social resistance, legal change, social change. Now here there is an evil. There is a people's resistance, but there is no way to make a legal change because laws have been substantially changed. Laws have exhausted. It's dehydrated. So there is nothing more for the laws to do here. Now how can the social change happen? And then there started an alternative imagination among the housewives and mothers of the state, that they began to use the small patches of their terraces for organic farming. And there is no legislation on organic farming, and there is also no state policy or a national policy encouraging organic farming, even though there is an endorsement for the indigenous approach to agriculture. But the housewives and the mothers, without any protocols, they started to use the small patches of their terraces and the lands they have for organic farming. And immediately, the state government, luckily at that time, this particular state were ruled by a socialistic government, not a government that subscribed to a liberal ideology. They began to come with governmental aids. No single legislation was changed, but they began to announce subsidies. They began to freely distribute organic seeds, and also began to even reward the people who were successful organic farmers. Again, by successful organic farming, I do not mean anything in large scale, but using the small patch of the terrace somebody has. In addition to that, this was taken over by the social media, that so many organic farming groups began to be formed in Facebook and in the Twitter, and they began to create a sort of fraternal relationship among them. The organic farming was actively promoted. They began to have their own excursions, their own retreats, their own congregations, and all on a sudden, sometime closer to 2015-16, the vegetable market in the state was stalled because of the intervention by the mothers and the housewives, because people do not need any more vegetables from the market. Vegetables are cultivated in their own respective patch. This is the sort of self-sufficiency which probably Nehru imagined, or Gandhi imagined way back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But now here again you can see that this is not an organized revolution. But however, people have called it as a social idealist revolution, whereby you change the reality around you by way of your own willing and acting. I would here try to liken this to Philip Allott's concept of social idealist revolution, or concept of social idealism, that you change the idea structure around you, not that the idea structure governs you. So what these mothers and the housewives of this particular state did, they didn't approach any government, they didn't try to make any legal changes. All they did was, by their own willing and acting, they changed to the active reality around them. And for a moment, the vegetable market was stalled. Immediately, the government began to announce a lot of policies in support of them, but not even a single legislation was enacted. So in sum, what you can see is that we have disturbed that equation. Evil, social change, no legal change. Sorry, evil, social resistance, no legal change, but yet there was a major social transformation happening. Now, this is informative for the the scholars or the pundits of the social legal studies, that it literally challenged the age-old dogma that legal change is a prerequisite for social change. Now, the situation is that you have a social change without even moving an inch of a law or without even a single legal intervention. In effect, the government has come forward, I've mentioned, with a lot of facilitative measures, but please note that the government was not institutionalizing the social change. The government was simply institutionalizing the resistance. So here, government institutionalized the resistance, and now people were able to make a social change. So in sum, this provides a new lesson to the pundits of social legal studies, that the age-old dictum is literally challenged. I mean, social change is possible without a legal change. Everything you need is that you need the willing and acting of the people. A social idealist revolution which wants to replace the world with the idea structure has ultimately brought the success. This is called a revolution revolution on the terraces. Right, a revolution by the women folk. I mean, this was mainly carried out by the women folk of that particular state. Now, if you look at this alternatives at large, I'm going to have the last phase of my talk. If you look at in the large scale, the concept of alternative imagination we talked about, how it has transformed agriculture law in India, let me just put it like that. First of all, this organic farming revolution is an effort to, or isn't that, I'll put it as a question, isn't that an effort to reclaim the ontological closeness of the farmer? I told you that the agrarian subject, the farmer, is somebody who derived an aesthetic pleasure from the union of the mind and the body, which they achieved through the confluence of land, animal, and nature. Isn't this organic farming revolution an effort to reclaim that? Now, everybody is indulged in that process. Everybody is deriving an inner beauty. Everybody is deriving that aesthetic pleasure by cultivating what they need in their own respective places. So it was, if you see things from a social idealistic perspective, it was an effort on the part of the housewives and mothers of the state of Kerala to reclaim their ontology, to reclaim that old agrarian consciousness which was lost somewhere when neoliberal forces ushered in. Second, it can be an ontological revolution. Heidegger would have goosebumps on it. It is probably an ontological revolution, the collective willing and acting of the people to transform their reality. So again, this gives us a lot of reassurance that to transform the world around you, to transform a reality, you do not need to resort to the laws. You do not need to formally approach the institutions. In fact, change is possible simply by the collective willing and acting of the people. Third, you can see that what has come in the place of the law here. So again, let me go back to that equation. Evil followed by social resistance, legal change, social change. Here, evil, social resistance, no legal change, just the collective willing and acting of the people and legal change. What we're seeing is in place of the law. So the functions which law used to perform for bringing a social change, now the collective willing and acting of a people. So this is in fact a critical moment, right? This is in fact a critical moment for the jurists, that social change can happen without a legal change. So what has replaced the legal change? Simply the collective willing and acting of a people. So maybe that social idealism, as envisaged by Philip Allard, can be an excellent replacement for the law. So we are governed by the dictates which institutions impose on us. Institutions are run on the basis of ideology. Why not our collective willing and acting? Our collective willing and acting, which is in fact the norm. Right, when we all collectively will and act on a certain thing, that becomes the law, no matter what the legislation is. Why not this be an excellent substitute for the law, or an alternative imagination for the law and the legal change thereof? Finally, the state was able to shed its neoliberal image. Now the state became more people-friendly. People feel that the state too becomes a participant. State too becomes a participant in our collective willing and acting, and probably the state too empathizes with the larger discontent we have developed. And you know that most of the states are today subscribing to such a view that it's high time for the people to return to their inness. So this was exactly what the state government did, that we'll provide you to get you back to your inness, to your ontological oneness with your being. And ag law, let me have the privilege to call it, I love calling agriculture law ag law, which is a US jargon. Ag law has become a striking illustration of this critical legal moment. And what's the critical legal moment I talked about? I hope it's clear to you now that you can have a social change without the legal change. So that means that the collective willing and acting of the people which secured the social change can be an excellent replacement for the law. Well, for critical theorists, this would be good news. So agro has become a wonderful site by the example of organic farming, and a wonderful site for an alternative imagination, and it became a wonderful site for a critical legal movement. So with that I stop, and I'll take your questions now.
Has the organic movement moved from Kerala to the rest of India as well, or is it mainly just in that state still?
Am I from that part?
No, has the organic
Oh, yeah, sorry.
movement spread to the rest of India?
Well, organic movement has been spreading, but again, I said that the first thing is the discontentment, to what extent you feel with that. So here, the discontentment of the globalization was so immensely felt in this particular state that people began to feel the need for it. And I said that the socialist government being in power at that time coincided with it. But indeed, organic farming movement is spreading, but it depends on how much that space is, or how much that state is globalized. So look at a state like Delhi, right? I'm sure that it's a site of globalization. The temporal conditions in the Delhi is entirely different, that it's difficult for something like organic farming to enter. But it's spreading like a forest fire, and the central government is deliberating on including that in the policy of the government. I mean, the agriculture policy of the state. So I'm sure that this would be spreading, but it's spreading like a forest fire now. And if you look at the states which have a socialistic government, there are just two such states in India, which is an ideology which is slowly dying in India. So I would also hesitate, or I would be reluctant to give it a pure socialistic character to this kind of a revolution. So I would rather call it a social idealist revolution, whereby you don't need to subscribe to any ideology. You don't need to be Marxian. You don't need to be a fan of, labor as a mode of production. You can do this simply by your collective willing and acting. But to your answer, yes, it is. Spreading.
Is it just in the kind of food sector, or is it in like cotton and other agricultural products as well?
Government is still run on dogmatic lines. It is highly institutionalized in the old ideology that it's still difficult for organic farming to find place in the law and policy. So that will be the major challenge now, that how organic farming can enter. Because I said that legislation is in a hopeless state, because on one side legislation is trying to ban the use of pesticides, and on the other side legislation also sets minimum standards, which the legislation has to do because it has global demands because of its subscription to international agreements. However, I'm sure that the organic farming revolution will find a space in the imagination of the legislators, so that it also gets institutionalized in due course.
When did pesticides come to India? Like, they're not part of the history?
Well, pesticides have always been used.
Yeah.
But I think the unbridled use of the pesticides probably started in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
And as far as organic farming is concerned, I'm sure that it's not just a socialist state like India. I'm sure that a lot of the states which subscribe to the liberal ideology, they too are now turning organic, because there is a larger discontentment developing with the globalization. And I'm sure that this piece is published in an American law review, a state where agriculture is at its best. California, right? And sandwalking. So they also began to feel a sense of discontent that it's high time to turn organic. And also the people feel a sense of empowerment here. They are being the causative for change. Or the people are the causal forces for change, not rather the state intervention or the legislature. So I'm sure that people coming from states which subscribe to capitalist ideology, you can also see that transformations are happening indeed there. Canada is turning organic. United States is turning organic. Yeah.
Sure. So at this moment in time, can India basically feed itself? Does India provide enough of agriculture to its economy so that it can sustain itself without agricultural inputs or not?
70% of Indian economy used to be 70% of the Indian economy used to be dependent on agriculture. However, the reliance on agriculture is still huge. However, after globalization, I've mentioned that there was, post-independence, there was a substantial reliance on imports. However, exports dwindled. I'm saying sometime in the 60s and 70s, exports substantially dwindled, and there was a need for a higher reliance on the imports by the state. However, post-globalization, no matter whatever happened with the farmers or the agrarian consciousness, India was able to substantially increase its productivity in agriculture. Agriculture still continues to be the mainstay for Indian economy. That's why the government is prioritizing it.
Yes, but does India provide enough, produces enough agriculture to feed itself or not?
That's a difficult question because I don't have any statistical information with me on that. But I believe, absolute self-sufficiency is not possible. There is still reliance, still reliance on the global market. So there's still reliance on global markets. That the guava used to be a fruit which is abundantly available in India, but today we get to eat guava imported from Thailand. So there is reliance on the imports, no doubt there is reliance, and also we have a common food market, and Indian food security has not to be food security is also not something which a nation has to secure. Food security is secured globally. So India too is an active participant in securing that food security. So when India is a participant to such a global ambition to secure food security, I'm sure India cannot stay away from imports and rely on this the sanctuary of self-sufficiency. India is relying on imports in agriculture.
Second question: with increasing automation of agriculture, increasing efficiency of like how much one farmer can produce per the unit of the land they have, in an Indian economy, a large percentage of people is involved in agriculture, and sometimes that agriculture is not that efficient in comparison to the West or
Absolutely.
even East like China. But those technology are going to come to India eventually. So how this changing structure of economics, structure of employment will affect this farming community?
So if you look at some of the manner in which, or the design in which agriculture is carried out in India, it's no more an individual farmer engaging in that. So I've mentioned somewhere during the talk that it is corporatized. So today India is more indulging in what we call the contract farming. And in contract farming, you know that it's not for your aesthetic pleasure you're doing the farming. You have clear targets. If you don't achieve the targets, you lose out on the market. So this has India is more adopting a Chinese model or a European model in terms of its agriculture, because now you are typically like a corporate, a corporate personnel who is trying to achieve a certain target. So I said that materially seeing there will be an increase to productivity. India is aligning closer with the global agriculture technology. Organic farming revolution need not be read as a threat to that. Organic farming, certainly. Organic farming is, again, I've said that, it needs to be given the importance it deserves, that's all. The people's resistance. Not more than that. I'm sure that government will also never let the organic farming revolution to stall India's participation in the global process. Or it will not let India to, de-align itself with the new technological development it is doing. So I think, directly addressing your question, I believe the contract farming is substantially bringing India closer to the efforts elsewhere in its agriculture. So probably the old Nehruvian ambition of indigeneity plus modernity, or indigeneity plus modernization, is somewhere losing out, that India is also willing to be on aggressive modernization of its agriculture.
What's India's policy on foreign investment and foreigners buying land or farming?
On agriculture, my understanding is it's 100%. 100% foreign investment in agriculture.
Is allowed?
Yeah.
So anyone...
I cannot vouch authoritatively on that because I'm not that an expert in investment law, but my understanding is it's 100%. Is allowed in agriculture for foreign investors.
But just on a corporate level or on a private level as well?
Sorry, it's on?
On a corporate level or just on a private level as well?
When I say investor, I mean the private investment. Right, private investment is allowed up to 100%. And it's a policy. I'll correct you if I'm wrong. Sorry, I'll correct myself if I'm wrong. If not, I won't communicate with you. I'm sorry, I'm not aware of that investment policies, but as far as my understanding, I remember to have read that it's 100% foreign private investment in agriculture. That's the only sector.
And do you know much about Indians investing outside of India? Because I've read about a lot of Indians going to places in Africa and buying up big plots of land to grow food and import back to India. Can you talk much about that? Or?
Well, I'm sure. The Indian investors are moving out. Wherever investment is possible, Indian investors are moving out to invest in Ghana, China. These are some of the regions in Ghana. I believe some of the Indian products are grown by the Indian investors there. Now, on another front, I just wanted to make a reference to that. There has been another demand from the Indian agriculture is that India should not unabashedly heed to the most favored nation treatment. At least exceptions should be created within agriculture, which is a state subject in India, or a subject to be legislated by the federal subject. That exceptions have to be created at least for the agriculture sector. Exceptions in terms of the most favored nation treatment, so that India again gains its indigenous advantage. I'm saying it's not exactly in the policy. That has just been a demand from certain corners. I mean, you can understand when there is a huge foreign private investment happening in agriculture, when there is a foreign interest happening here, it's difficult for the local farmers to survive. So that's why there has been a demand. And this is not only just in the agriculture sector. I believe this demand has been put forward even for the space sector. That for those space agencies which develop indigenous technology in India, they should find sufficient exceptions within the most favored, exceptions in terms of this most favored nation treatment. So somewhere that ambition still remains to be self-sufficient. That ghost continues to haunt. Well, I take no sides here.
Do you think it's possible?
It requires a lot of imagination from the government. I really do not know how to create an exception. Maybe that you have to draw parallels from the exceptions which regionalism strikes. So how European Union has been able to get exceptions for their MFN policy. Analogies have to be drawn and imaginative spaces have to be found in the legislation. I'm not sure about that.
If India has two pretty aggressive neighbors with nuclear weapon capacities and shares borders with pretty unstable regimes like Iran, Pakistan, self-sufficiency is required. Otherwise, it can be cut off from trade routes in case of a major.
Yeah. I agree with that. And also, you have to displease some of your major collaborators if you try to create exceptions for you, exceptions for your national market. And that even when you have strong subscriptions to international standards and strong commitments to provide most favored nation and national treatments. Again, as I answered to her, it's difficult. I'm not sure how much imagination can go. Maybe that in one of the subsequent rounds of WTO, there may be some ministerial declaration which would provide India an opportunity to create that kind of an exception. Otherwise, no, absolutely no. I'm sure WTO don't work on the basis of analogies drawn from a clear regional side like European Union. I'm sure it's not possible here. And of course, the security perspective you have provided here, that's difficult for India to create like that. So I would strongly recommend I get a sadistic pleasure in recommending my paper paper for others. If you get time to read this, please read this paper. It's in Sandwalk in Agriculture Law Review. It's called a Paradigm Shift in Social and Legal Change. Sandwalk in Agriculture Law Review 2017. The last issue of 2017, Sandwalk in Agriculture Law Review. It's called a paradigm shift in social, or a revolution in social and legal change. The Kerala model resistance to pesticide overuse. A Kerala model resistance to pesticide overuse. It's a case study basically, and inputs have been drawn. Inputs have been drawn on from that case study for building a new theory for social and legal change, which I've already mentioned to you.
Could you send that to Sean? Could you send that reading to Sean? So
It's online. I think Sandwalk in Agriculture Law Review, because current issue is open, right? For all American law reviews, the current issue is open, including Harvard Law Review. They keep it open. All right. So thank you very much for this. So hope to see you some other time. Thank you very much.
Do you have an email address?
You can find me in the profile. I'm the Associate Dean of the Law School. I manage the routine academic work, the teaching and the learning here. S.G. Srijit. S.G. Srijit. Yeah, you can find it in the website. All right, so goodbye and have a nice day here. I'm sure that I come to you by the time much water has flown under the bridge. This is probably one among your last days here. Right. All right, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
make it more involved now in comparison to our 2.5 hours we got during busy hours.
Is there anybody who needs to say the night of the 27th?
Guys, who's going home now? Come on, selection of time. Okay. Anyone who's not going to bed? You walked in. You walked in.
That was like,
I've never seen you so down. Incredible.
You're so on the jazz.
You know us.
Feeling better because of the comparison.
I've never heard someone speak so fast.
Yes, and
Oh, I'm so tired. Like I can actually sat like.
Did you want me to sit on YouTube video?
So weird.
It's actually really like, no one smells variation. What I find especially hilarious is that we have a special requirement which says like, well, you get out of almost 80 times. I have to. Send a special report every year to get that on them.
no.
I had to go out last night and then go to bed.
Called non-duality.
Oh man, I slept 1.5 hours. Like,
It's meant to be like
Dualism is like. Dualism. That's about like I just don't know, yeah, when we'll have another opportunity.
kind of describe that in much where they talk about like not
what time
doing
does the
approach,
mall close?
not all like goal
What time does the shopping mall close?
rather than just
Where
being
you-
like,
Do you know what time?
So unhealthy.
they have
What do you want?
maybe that's integrity instead of having
Oh,
this
okay, no, all good.
duration
Should we go now or after? Do you want to go see the function
No.
of the chakra?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
This is like
I want to see if anyone else, like,
it's current definition.
yeah. I don't know,
Be at the moment rather than
can we make decisions on
trying to
behalf of,
continue to solve moments where you
I
can't
don't know.
try and then it's just a cycle.
Yeah, whenever you have another opportunity, we should do it today. I mean, the problem, like, I don't want to go to this fucking thing this afternoon, but no one does.
Yeah, we can't all
So, yeah.
that'll distract you.
We can't at though.
Today or
Yeah,
maybe
no,
free.
it's hard. They talk about it's like a disconnection when you're trying to
average one. If you would you come early?
If you find a local to go.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
back to that.
Yeah.
I'm keen.
Actually,
Sort of combination.
that's what he says. On his message one. So yeah, most of them are not like that's what like you virtually okay.
Does anyone know the hotel that the people stayed at from Murdoch and Monash?
So they have like a brown markets there or something?
They're all in this.
They have like they have
Oh
like,
yeah.
What was that?
It's pretty big actually.
They have like
Oh, in Delhi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot of hotels.
I know, that's what I mean. I'll ask them.
Do you want a nice hotel?
Yeah, she has a fancy one.
Oh, you think I'm going to hotel on Saturday? Yeah. Oh, really? Well, yeah, because I need to get to the airport.
You want America?
We just